I've never told anyone this story, not my colleagues, not my ex-wife, not even the priest who once told me I had a soul too scientific for salvation. Maybe he was right, but what I saw in that forest 3 years ago, the night I pulled a dying creature out of the mud and into my cabin, made me understand that salvation isn't what any of us think it is, and heaven, God help me, heaven isn't where we're headed. It started after the fires. Northern California had burned for weeks, and when the smoke cleared, I took what was left of my savings and drove north into the woods, hoping for quiet. I'd lost my license after a malpractice suit. A boy died on my table, and with it went my sense of purpose. I told myself I just needed time to think, but the truth was simpler. I wanted to disappear. The cabin I rented was old, tucked between pine and fog. There was no reception, no neighbors for miles. The forest itself felt alive, like something ancient breathing beneath the moss and soil. Nights there were darker than city people can imagine. When the wind stopped, you could hear the forest's pulse, the cracking of branches, the distant call of unseen things. I began to believe silence could drive a man mad. On the third night, it came. I woke to a sound that didn't belong, a deep, metallic groan, followed by a crash that shook the ground. I thought a tree had fallen, maybe struck by lightning, but the air was still. When I stepped outside, the forest glowed faintly in the distance, a soft blue like moonlight caught in fog. I should have stayed inside. I should have locked the door and prayed. But curiosity has always been my sin. I grabbed my flashlight, boots crunching on the wet leaves, and followed the light. The glow grew stronger as I approached, pulsating in slow, rhythmic waves, as though the earth itself was breathing. The air smelled of ozone, sharp, sterile, electric. I found the crater about 50 yards from the clearing, steam rising from twisted metal half buried in the soil. At first I thought it was a plane crash, then it moved. A figure lay half out of the wreckage, slender, human-shaped, but wrong. Its skin shimmered like liquid glass, fractured with veins of faint light. The head was elongated, eyes closed, a wound across its chest, leaking something that wasn't quite blood, thicker, luminous, fading into vapor when it hit the ground. I froze. Every rational thought screamed to run, to report it, to forget. But it was dying. I could see the shuddering rise and fall of its chest, the flicker of faint consciousness. And I was still a doctor. Instinct overruled terror. I tore off my jacket, pressed it to the wound, and whispered useless words. "Hold on, you'll be okay." My hands trembled. Its skin was cold and smooth, but when I touched it, something surged through me, a vibration deep in my chest, like two heartbeats overlapping. Its eyes opened. They weren't eyes. They were galaxies, rings of shifting color and light that seemed to look through me, not at me, and when it spoke, it didn't use a mouth. The voice filled my head like a thought that wasn't mine. "You are not meant to see me." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. Jesus Christ! It flinched at the name, like the word itself carried weight. Then it reached out, not with fingers, but with light, a faint beam touching my forehead. The pain vanished from its face. "You still remember his name," it said, each word heavy and echoing. "Good. He remembers you too." Before I could respond, the light in its chest flared again. Dimmer this time. It was dying faster now. My instincts took over. I dragged it back toward the cabin, every muscle screaming. The forest seemed to part for us, the trees bending slightly as though aware of what passed through them. By the time I reached the porch, I was drenched in sweat and disbelief. Inside, under the single dim bulb, it looked almost human, almost beautiful. The wound was deep but clean, a slash across its torso. I cleaned it mechanically, hands shaking. It didn't move, didn't breathe, yet life pulsed faintly within it like light beneath ice. When I stitched the wound, the thread burned faintly at my fingertips. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was watching its chest rise and fall. The next I was standing in a place that wasn't my cabin anymore. A white plain stretched endlessly under a sky of violet fire. In the distance stood a figure robed in light. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was him. Jesus. Yet he wasn't like any image I'd seen in church. He was vast, radiant, almost alien in form, shifting between human and something formless, infinite. His voice filled the plain. You will heal one who fell from grace. Through him, I will show you what man refuses to see. I woke to sunlight piercing the window. The being was still there, breathing, faint but alive. Its wound was closed, though no scar remained. When its eyes opened again, I saw sadness there, deep, ancient sorrow. It spoke softly, its voice inside my mind again. You saved me, doctor, but saving comes with sight, and sight comes with burden. What are you? I whispered. It looked at me, not with pride, not with threat, but pity. I am what your kind will become when heaven closes its gates. The words struck me like a physical blow. Before I could ask more, the lights flickered, the cabin walls hummed, and in that low vibration, I felt something else awaken. Something watching us from the forest beyond. That was the night the truth began, and I wish to God I'd let it die in that crater. Before we continue, just a quick thing. If this story has made you question something in your heart, if you feel like there's more to this world than we've been told, hit the subscribe button, because there's more encounters, more truths, and more hidden stories that you were never meant to hear. Now, let's continue. By dusk, the forest had gone silent again, but nothing felt natural anymore. Every sound carried weight. Every shadow seemed aware. Rodriguez sat in his cabin, staring at the being that now rested motionless on his cot. The air smelled faintly of ozone and pine, like the aftermath of a storm that never reached the sky. He tried to convince himself it was all delusion, oxygen deprivation, shock, exhaustion. But every time his eyes met that faint blue shimmer under the creature's skin, reason dissolved. Something real lay there, something wounded and holy. He found himself whispering scripture without knowing why. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. He hadn't quoted the Bible in years. It used to mean comfort. Now it felt like warning. The being stirred. Its gaze found him again, and the voice came, not through sound, but as vibration through his bones. Not all who descend from light are angels. Some fall by will, some by mercy. Rodriguez's throat tightened. You mean you fell? From what? Heaven? The being's expression was unreadable. yet sorrow pressed like a tangible weight between them. Names are small things for vast realms, but yes, once I served among those who guarded the crossings between your world and his. It paused, as if remembering something that pained it. There was rebellion, not of hate, but of pity. We wanted to lift mankind before they were ready. Rodriguez swallowed hard. That sounds like Lucifer. A faint tremor crossed its features. You speak of one who sought thrones. We sought understanding. He desired worship. We desired restoration. But heaven burns all disobedience with the same flame. Rodriguez leaned back, his pulse hammering. The creature's voice carried neither pride nor defiance, only exhaustion, like a soldier haunted by the memory of war. He didn't know if he believed it, but something deep inside, a place untouched since childhood, recognized truth in the rhythm of its words. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why come here, to me?" The being's eyes dimmed. "Because your kind nears the veil. You tamper with life and death, believing them separate things. You strip the image of God from his breath. Soon the line between flesh and spirit will vanish, and when it does, heaven must choose whether to cleanse or to reclaim." Rodriguez shivered. "You're saying humanity is crossing into something it shouldn't?" "You are awakening without guidance, Jung," it replied. "Science has replaced faith, yet neither has love. You cure the body, but abandon the soul. You build towers of metal, forgetting Babel's dust." The words cut deep. He wanted to argue, to defend the progress that once defined him, but the memory of the boy who died under his hands silenced him. That night had stripped him of the illusion that medicine alone could save. Lightning flickered beyond the window, though no thunder followed. For a heartbeat, the trees glowed faintly blue, the same light that had filled the crater. Rodriguez rose, uneasy. "Are there others?" "There were," it said. "Some fell long ago, some were captured. Your governments call them by other names." He turned sharply. "Captured? You mean—" "Men fear what proves their scripture true. They cage the witnesses and bury the scrolls that reveal them." Rodriguez felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying they know?" The being looked toward the window, eyes reflecting the faint pulse of distant light. "They know enough to hide. But they cannot hide what's coming." Outside, the wind stirred suddenly, branches scraping against the walls, whispering in strange cadence. It sounded almost like words. Rodriguez grabbed a lantern, moving to the door, but the being's voice stopped him. "Do not go. They listen through the dark." He froze. "Who?" "Those who feed on fear. They dwell between the prayers of men." For a moment, Rodriguez thought he meant demons, but the voice came again, softer now. "They are remnants of the first exile. They wear flesh like clothing and whisper faith into madness." His breath quickened. The rational part of him screamed to stop listening, to run, to forget. But the forest outside was alive with something ancient, the kind of silence that presses against eardrums until thought itself grows heavy. The being sat upright now, strength returning. Its wound had vanished entirely, leaving behind faint traces of light under translucent skin. It looked human enough to unsettle him, tall, graceful, eyes carrying both mercy and mourning. "You said heaven might cleanse or reclaim," Rodriguez said slowly. Which will it choose? It met his gaze. That depends on who speaks first, your kind or ours. He didn't understand. Speaks to whom? To him. The one you call Christ, he is not gone. He is beyond the frequencies of sight, waiting for the harmony of creation to return. But your churches have muted the song. Rodriguez's head spun. You're saying Jesus, he's still alive? Not as a spirit, but alive in the dimension of light, it said simply. He walks among the stars as the bridge between worlds. We see him when we cross. His form is not bound to matter but meaning. You made his death a religion when it was meant to be a key. Rodriguez pressed a hand to his chest. The words tore something open inside him. He had believed once, deeply, but years of loss and medicine had buried faith beneath procedure and logic. Yet hearing this, part of him felt that same ache he'd known as a child staring at a crucifix, asking silently if God ever looked back. The creature's gaze softened. You still doubt? I'm a man of science, Rodriguez said. I need proof. For the first time it smiled, sadly, knowingly. Then you will see proof. But truth and terror are brothers. You cannot invite one without the other. Before Rodriguez could speak, the lantern flickered violently, the flame stretching upward as though pulled by unseen breath. Every shadow in the cabin twisted. The air thickened. Outside, something moved, a rustle too heavy for wind, too slow for any animal. The being turned its head toward the door. They come for what I carry. What do you carry? Its eyes blazed briefly, casting soft light across the walls. A memory of Eden. A fragment of the voice that spoke creation into order. If it is silenced, mankind will forget what heaven ever was. The window cracked, a whisper slipped through, words layered over words. Like many mouths speaking one sentence. He should not have lived. Rodriguez froze, terror rooting him to the floor. The being rose, light spreading beneath its skin like veins of fire. Stay behind me, it said. You saved me, Doctor. Now I must save what little faith remains. And as it stepped toward the door, the forest outside began to glow, not blue now, but red, like the reflection of a rising sun that had no place in the night. The forest outside roared without sound, every branch trembling as if some unseen hand passed through it. Rodriguez's breath caught in his throat. The being stood before the door, light spilling from its skin in ripples that made the shadows shrink away. It raised one hand, and the air itself seemed to bend. The whispering stopped. For a heartbeat, silence returned. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate thuds that made the walls vibrate. Rodriguez felt his chest tighten. The thing outside wasn't human. He knew that instinctively. The being turned toward him, its face calm but distant. Do not open. They cannot enter unless invited. He swallowed hard. Who are they? Voices that fell without form. They gather where fear breathes. They feed on those who seek truth too quickly. The door rattled again. This time a voice came with it. Rodriguez's own voice, perfect and cold. Open the door, Doctor. Someone's hurt out here. He stumbled backward. That's... It mimics what you love, the being said quietly. Truth has an echo, but lies have a mirror. The voice outside changed. Now it was his ex-wife. Miguel, please, it's me. Please help me. The cry cut straight through him. He wanted to believe it. Every nerve screamed to rush to the door, to see her face again, but the being's hand rose in warning. If you open it, you will see her, what remains of her in their memory, but she will not see you again. Rodriguez sank to his knees, trembling. The voice outside turned angry, then desperate, then faded into silence. Only the steady sound of rain remained, though he hadn't seen clouds all evening. The being moved closer to the window. They know now that you can hear. They will follow the frequency. He didn't understand. What frequency? Faith. It is not a feeling. It is a wavelength. Every prayer, every doubt, every act of love emits it. You reached it when you touched me. Now they can trace you. He sat motionless, hands gripping the edge of the table. What do they want? The creature looked at him with infinite sorrow. Saw the same thing they wanted in the beginning, to replace heaven with hunger. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest. For a heartbeat, Rodriguez saw shapes moving between the trees, tall, slender, translucent figures, almost human but not. Their eyes glowed faintly red, like embers buried in ash. When the light faded, they were gone. He turned back to the being. You said you carry a memory of Eden. What does that mean? Eden was not a garden, it said. It was alignment, a resonance between flesh and light. Humanity once walked in harmony with the voice of God, but when the voice withdrew, you called it sin. We called it silence. Rodriguez's mind reeled. And hell? The being's gaze hardened. Hell is not fire, it is distance. The farther a soul drifts from the source, the colder it becomes. We measure it not in torment, but in isolation. He thought of his own life, years spent numbing guilt with work, isolation disguised as purpose. The words landed like confession. Then I've been in hell a long time, he whispered. The creature reached out, placing a hand over his heart. A faint warmth pulsed through his chest, spreading like light through glass. Not yet, you still hear. Those lost forever do not know they are gone. The touch filled him with a strange clarity. For a brief moment, he saw flashes, cities of light beyond the clouds, rivers of radiant color, beings of every form singing in frequencies he couldn't comprehend. But beneath it all, he saw darkness creeping upward, swallowing stars one by one. He gasped. What is that? What comes after disbelief, the being said softly. The great forgetting. When humanity no longer remembers that it was made in his image, creation itself begins to decay. Rodriguez stood, pacing. If that's true, if everything depends on faith, then why doesn't he stop it? Why doesn't God show himself again? The being lowered its gaze. Because he is bound by his own law, choice. Love cannot exist without it. To reveal himself would end the test. You must remember him without sight. Rodriguez's anger flared. Then what are you doing here? Why risk everything to tell me this? Its eyes dimmed. Because I disobeyed that law once. I tried to reveal what should have remained mystery. For that, I fell. But when you saved me, you gave me one more chance to speak what little truth I am allowed. The wind outside began to rise again, the forest groaning like an ocean of wood. Rodriguez felt the pressure build behind his eyes, as if the air itself was thickening. "They're coming back," he said. The being nodded. "They know you believe now. Belief is a beacon." The window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. Shadows poured through, fluid and shapeless, clinging to the corners of the cabin. Rodriguez stumbled backward, clutching the lantern. The being stepped forward, its body flaring with blinding white light. The shadows hissed, retreating, but not vanishing. "They cannot touch you while I remain," it said. "But they can wait." Rodriguez's voice shook. "What do I do?" "Listen," the being said. "Before dawn, I must return to the place I fell. There lies the gate I was guarding, the passage between the realms of light and the depths you call hell. It is weakening, if it opens fully. Those outside will walk in flesh again." Rodriguez stared. "And you expect me to help you close it?" "You are already part of it," it said simply. "The moment you touched me, the gate marked you as its witness." He felt dizzy, the room spinning. "Why me? I'm not a priest. I'm not holy. I don't even know if I believe anymore." The being smiled faintly. "That is precisely why you were chosen. Faith that survives reason is the rarest kind." A sudden crack split the night. Another tree falling, or something worse. Rodriguez looked toward the forest, where the red light pulsed again, brighter now, spreading like fire beneath the earth. The being turned toward the door. "We must go." He hesitated. "Now?" "If the gate opens before sunrise, heaven will not close it again." Rodriguez grabbed his coat and the lantern, hands trembling. As they stepped into the cold air, he felt the forest watching, thousands of unseen eyes in the dark. The being's light cut a narrow path ahead, and the trees bent as they passed. They reached the crater just as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The wreckage still smoked faintly, but now the ground beneath it pulsed with dull red veins. Rodriguez felt heat rising, like breath from something buried alive. The being looked down with sadness too deep for words. "It begins." The earth cracked open, and a sound like 1,000 voices whispered from below. Rodriguez fell to his knees, clutching his head as visions poured into his mind. Faces, fire, endless corridors of screaming light. And somewhere in the midst of it all, a single voice spoke, vast and sorrowful. "Man has chosen knowledge without wisdom." The bridge breaks. Rodriguez screamed as the forest filled with red light and the sky turned black. The earth split open like a wound, glowing from within. Rodriguez staggered backward, shielding his face from the searing red light that pulsed from the crater. The sound was beyond thunder. A low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate inside his bones, shaking loose the edges of thought itself. He tasted iron, smelled something like burnt ozone and rain. The being knelt at the rim, its eyes blazing white, hands raised toward the sky. Rodriguez shouted over the roar, "What's happening?" Its voice came through the chaos, calm but urgent. "The breach is opening, the passage between what was and what must never return." A column of light erupted from the ground, spearing into the clouds. Shadows moved within it, figures twisting. Reaching upward, like souls trying to escape. Rodriguez saw faces there, human and not human, mouths open in silent screams. For a moment, he thought he recognized one. The boy who'd died under his hands years ago. He stumbled forward, but the being held him back. "They are echoes," it said, "not what they once were." Rodriguez fell to his knees, covering his face. The heat was unbearable. He felt as though the world was being peeled apart. Then, slowly, the light began to fade. The roar softened to a low pulse, rhythmic and terrible, like the beating of a buried heart. The being lowered its hands. "It has begun," it whispered. Rodriguez rose shakily. "You said we could stop it." "We can delay it," the being replied, "but the wound has been made. The seal was meant to hold until your kind remembered who they were, but they forgot too soon." Rodriguez stared at the crater. "Forgot what?" "That light and shadow were never enemies," it said softly. "They were balance. When one grows stronger, creation tilts." The forest trembled again. Trees bent as if in wind, but there was none. A cold mist began to roll from the ground, thick and luminous, carrying whispers that sounded like prayer turned inside out. Rodriguez's heart pounded. He grabbed the being's arm. "What do we do?" "We find the others who remember," it said. "There are few left. Some among you see the signs, dreams, symbols, unexplainable visions. They are fragments of the original resonance. You must gather them." Rodriguez blinked in disbelief. "You expect me to find people like that? I don't even know what I'm looking for." "You will know by the feeling in your chest," the being said. "The same pull that brought you to me." He looked down at his hands, still trembling, streaked with dirt and light. His mind fought to cling to reason, but reason had been drowned by what he'd seen. "What happens if I don't?" The being turned toward the horizon where dawn struggled through the clouds. Its expression was unreadable, but sorrow radiated from it like heat. "Then this world will forget its name." They walked back toward the cabin in silence. The light from the crater dimmed until it was only a faint glow beneath the soil, like an ember refusing to die. Rodriguez's legs felt heavy. The forest no longer looked alive. It looked hollow, as though the soul had been drained from it. At the cabin, he collapsed into the chair by the table, shaking uncontrollably. The being watched him with something like compassion. "You still have choice," it said, quietly. "That is your power. Use it before it is taken." Rodriguez looked up, eyes hollow. "Choice? What choice do I have? Everything I've believed is gone." The being tilted its head. "Belief is not gone, it has changed shape. You saw the light, yet you remain. That means it still sees you." He buried his face in his hands. "I don't even know what that means." "It means," the being said gently, "that you are not finished." The rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops that hissed as they touched the still warm ground. The sound filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Rodriguez stared at the wooden floor where faint lines of blue light traced patterns he didn't recognize. They pulsed slowly, in rhythm with the rain. He whispered, "Is that you doing that?" The being shook its head. "No, It is this place. It remembers what it once protected. Rodriguez leaned closer. The patterns looked almost like writing, ancient symbols that shifted as he watched, rearranging into something that felt familiar. He couldn't read it, but part of him understood. A warning, a map, a promise. He looked up at the being. "Can you read it?" It hesitated. "I can feel it. It speaks of a crossing, a door made of thought and sound, one that cannot be sealed with stone or fire, only with will." Rodriguez frowned. "A door made of thought?" "Faith," it said simply, "but not the kind you build temples for, the kind that creates worlds." The lights flickered again, and for a moment the cabin felt alive, a pulse in the walls, a hum in the air. Rodriguez's mind flooded with flashes of memory not his own, vast halls of light, creatures singing in languages older than stars, and in the center, a great silence waiting to be broken. Then it was gone. He gasped, clutching his chest. The being stood motionless, its eyes dimming. "They felt that," it said. "The breach widened when you touched the memory." Rodriguez staggered to his feet. "Then what are we supposed to do? Run?" The being turned toward the door. "You cannot run from what lives inside you. We must return to the forest before night. There is something buried beneath the old trees. It will either heal the breach or finish the world." Rodriguez felt cold dread settle over him. He wanted to say no, to demand answers, but the look in the creature's eyes silenced him. Somewhere deep down, he already knew that the forest would call to him no matter where he went. As they stepped outside, the last light of morning faded behind thick clouds. The trees loomed taller than before, their trunks twisted like veins. The mist rose again, but now it shimmered faintly with streaks of gold. The being whispered, almost to itself, "It remembers us." Rodriguez followed, heart pounding, into the forest that seemed to breathe with every step they took. Somewhere in the distance something moved, a sound like wings scraping against bark. And as they vanished into the fog, the faint hum from the crater began again, low and steady, like the heartbeat of something that had just awakened. The fog thickened until Rodriguez could barely see his own hands. The air tasted of copper and rain, and every breath felt like inhaling something alive. The forest around them seemed to shift when they weren't looking, trees changing angles, but paths curving where none existed a moment before. Rodriguez kept close to the being, who glided through the mist as if it knew every route, every shadow. Its movements were too smooth, too precise, like it wasn't walking through the world, but remembering it back into place. He whispered, "You said something's buried out here. What is it?" The being's voice was low, barely cutting through the wind. "The first gate. Before your species spoke names. It was sealed when the world was still being written." Rodriguez frowned. "Written? By who?" The being didn't answer immediately. "By those who dreamed you into existence. You were the last sentence they wrote before they vanished." A chill ran through him. "Vanished where?" It turned its head slightly. "Where everything goes when it stops being remembered." The forest floor dipped suddenly, revealing a shallow valley blanketed in pale moss. At the center stood a single black tree, twisted, leafless, and taller than the rest. The mist avoided it, curling around its roots like smoke. Rodriguez felt it before he saw it, a deep vibration under his feet, pulsing in slow intervals. The closer he got, the stronger it became, until his teeth ached and his vision wavered. He stopped. "That's not a tree, is it?" The being shook its head. "It was once alive. Now it's only a mark left by what it held." They approached slowly. The trunk was engraved with hundreds of thin lines, spiraling upward in a language he couldn't recognize but somehow understood. He reached out to touch it, but the being caught his wrist. "Careful," it warned. "It remembers touch. It could remember you." Rodriguez stared at it. "What's supposed to be underneath?" The being knelt at the roots, placing its palm on the soil. The ground shimmered faintly, rippling outward in circles. "A vessel," it said. "It holds the first resonance, the sound that made life aware of itself. It was silenced when your kind began to name things. Every name was a chain, every definition a lock. Now the locks are breaking." Rodriguez crouched beside it, his breath trembling. "You're saying words broke the world?" "Words created it," the being replied, "and then trapped it." For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence pressed down, heavy and almost physical. Somewhere in the distance an animal screamed, a sharp, echoing cry that was cut off abruptly. The being's eyes flickered. "They're close." Rodriguez stiffened. "Who?" "The echoes, the ones who were erased when the first gate closed. They smell the breach." The fog thickened again, and shapes began to move within it. They were tall and thin, bending unnaturally as they walked, their limbs trembling like strings in the wind. Their faces were blank, smooth, white surfaces that reflected faint light. Rodriguez's heart thudded. "What are they?" The being rose to its full height. Remnants, fragments of memory that refused to fade. They want to be remembered again. But every time they're seen, they steal from the one who sees. Rodriguez took a step back. "You mean they feed on recognition?" it said. "If they make you believe they're real, you cease to be." The first of the shapes broke through the mist, tilting its head at an impossible angle. Its surface rippled like water. Rodriguez's breath caught. It had no features, but he could feel it looking at him. The being stepped forward, spreading its hands. Lines of light appeared in the air, weaving between the trees, a net of pale symbols that shimmered faintly, forming a circle around them. "Stay inside," it commanded. Rodriguez obeyed, though his legs trembled. The figures began to circle, their movements in perfect rhythm, whispering in voices too soft to understand. The light flickered. One of them reached through, its arms stretching like mist. Rodriguez grabbed a branch from the ground and swung instinctively. The branch passed through it, scattering its form into smoke that immediately reformed. The whispering grew louder. The being's eyes flared white. "They are feeding off your fear. Stop thinking their shape." Rodriguez tried, but how do you not think of something staring at you? The shapes grew clearer, sharper. He saw mouths forming where none had been, filled with teeth like broken glass. He shouted, "It's not working!" The being turned sharply toward him. "Then let them remember me instead." It raised both hands and light exploded outward. The creatures shrieked, a sound so shrill it made the trees vibrate. Their forms convulsed, cracking and folding inward as if crushed by invisible pressure. The ground shook, and the tree at the center split open, revealing a pit of soft blue light beneath it. The mist was gone. The air felt suddenly clean, cold, raw. Rodriguez fell to his knees, gasping. What did you just do?" The being's voice was quieter now, drained. "I reminded them of what they once were." Silence. Rodriguez stared at the glowing pit. Inside it, faint motes of light drifted like embers. He could hear something faint, a pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through time. He swallowed hard. "That's it, isn't it? The gate." The being nodded slowly. "The first one. If it opens completely, memory will collapse. Every life, every thought, unwritten in reverse." Rodriguez stared into the light. "And you brought me here to stop that?" "No," the being said softly. "I brought you here because it will choose who can." He looked up sharply. "It? What do you mean it will choose?" The being turned toward him. For the first time, there was fear in its voice. "It does not remember mercy, only purpose." Before Rodriguez could respond, the light flared brighter, searing white and blue, washing over the forest like a wave. The sound that followed was not a sound at all, but a feeling, a vibration deep inside his chest that pulled at every memory, every name, every belief he'd ever had. The world around him began to dissolve. Rodriguez opened his eyes and found himself lying on a wooden floor. The scent of damp timber filled his lungs, and outside the cracked window he could hear rain. Not forest rain. This was heavier, familiar, almost comforting. He sat up, blinking at the dim light. It took him a few seconds to realize where he was. His cabin. The one he'd built years ago on the edge of the Cascades. But everything was wrong. The furniture was in the same place. The old medical books lined the same shelves. Yet the air felt hollow, as if the room were a photograph of itself. He stood slowly, his knees aching. The hum of that strange light still buzzing in his head. "Hello?" he called, though he knew no one would answer. The silence pressed against his words like static. Then he heard it. A faint knocking from beneath the floorboards. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 more. He crouched, pressing his ear to the wood. The rhythm repeated. He lifted the rug and pried up a loose board. Beneath it, instead of dirt and insulation, was stone, smooth and grey, etched with shallow grooves forming a spiral. He reached out and touched it. The cabin around him flickered like a dying bulb. For an instant he wasn't in the cabin at all. He was standing in a vast black hall, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls alive with pulsing veins of light. The air shimmered, and the being stood before him again, but its shape was different now, less human, more radiant. Its form stretching and folding, as if trying to hold itself together in this new space. "Where am I?" Rodriguez whispered. "Between remembering and forgetting," the being said. "The gate accepted you." He tried to steady his breath. "Accepted me for what?" "To witness." The floor trembled. Around them the darkness began to move, revealing shapes within it, figures suspended in light, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Men and women, children, their eyes closed, their faces calm as if dreaming. Rodriguez's voice cracked. "Who are they?" "Those who once questioned, the seekers who looked beyond the words and could not return." He moved closer to one of the figures. It was a man in a tattered coat, his hands clasped together in prayer. "Are they alive?" "Alive enough to remember what they saw," the being answered. "But if they ever wake, your world will not survive what they tell." Rodriguez shivered. "Then why bring me here? Why show me this?" The being tilted its head. "Because the silence is ending. You were chosen to carry the noise." He stared at it. "What noise?" The beings stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. "The truth that cannot be spoken without undoing belief itself." A low vibration filled the air, the kind that seems to come from inside the bones. The figures hanging in light began to stir, their fingers twitching, their eyelids fluttering. The hall shook. "It begins," the being said softly. "Your kind called it revelation, but it is only memory resurfacing." A beam of light shot through the floor, and suddenly Rodriguez could see scenes unfolding around him like fragments of film. Cities burning, churches collapsing, stars dimming one by one. And through it all, he saw people lifting their heads toward the sky, not in fear, but in recognition, as if something ancient had finally returned. He turned toward the being, his voice breaking. "You said, heaven and hell. What are they?" "Not places," it answered. "States of memory. Heaven is the echo of unity before separation. Hell is the endless noise of names, every identity screaming to exist. You live inside that noise." Rodriguez shook his head, tears mixing with sweat. "That can't be all there is." The being regarded him with something like sorrow. "You still hope for a story that ends well. That is your greatest mercy and your greatest curse." The ground split open beneath them, light pouring upward like a fountain. The suspended figures dissolved into streams of energy. Rising through the cracks, their voices joined together in a single tone that wasn't sound at all but a feeling, grief, wonder, longing all at once. Rodriguez fell to his knees, covering his ears. Though it did nothing, the light burned behind his eyelids. He screamed, "Make it stop!" The being's form wavered, its outline dissolving into threads of silver. "It cannot stop. It has already begun. The gate remembers itself through you." The light intensified, swallowing the hall, the walls, even the ground beneath him. He felt himself lifted, weightless, every cell in his body unraveling into memory. And then, silence. He opened his eyes again. He was standing in the forest, dawn breaking through the trees. The crater was gone, the air was still, and there was no sign of the being. Only the faint outline of a spiral etched into the earth where the light had been. Rodriguez stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. He tried to speak, but his voice came out wrong, like an echo played backward. And somewhere, faint but unmistakable, the knocking returned. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 more, coming not from the ground, but from inside his own chest. Rodriguez stumbled through the forest, clutching his chest, where the knocking still echoed beneath his ribs. Each thud was soft but undeniable, like a heart that didn't belong to him. The morning light bled through the trees in fractured shafts, catching in the mist that refused to clear. birds were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He reached the dirt road where his truck was parked. It was there, just as he'd left it. Except for one thing, the windshield was covered in a thin layer of frost, though the air was warm. Drawn into the frost with something sharp was a spiral, the same pattern that had appeared beneath his cabin. He ran a shaking hand over it, wiping it away. Beneath the melted ice, he saw words scratched into the glass. "Do not speak their names." The letters shimmered faintly as if lit from within, then faded as soon as he blinked. He got into the truck, turned the key, and felt the engine rumble weakly to life. The radio came on by itself. White noise at first, then a faint voice breaking through, distorted but human. "Rodriguez, listen. The gates are shifting." He froze. "Who is this?" The static pulsed like breathing. Then the voice came again, clearer now. "This frequency is bleeding through. You need to contain it." Rodriguez swallowed hard. "Contain what?" "The sound," the voice said. "Don't let it remember you." The signal cut off. Silence. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, his pulse racing. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would believe this? The police? His colleagues at the hospital? He imagined their faces if he told them about light, memory, beings of silence. They'd lock him up. Maybe they should. He drove toward town, every turn of the tires sounding too loud, too rhythmic, matching the knocking inside his chest. The forest thinned, replaced by fields and scattered houses. When he reached the first intersection, the traffic light blinked red, then white, then red again. He waited, unease rising in him. A man in a brown coat was standing on the other side of the road, watching him. He looked ordinary, maybe in his 40s, unshaven, eyes hidden under a baseball cap. But there was something about the way he stood, motionless, that set every nerve in Rodriguez's body on fire. The man lifted a hand and pointed directly at him. Rodriguez's breath hitched. The man mouthed something he couldn't hear, then turned and walked away into the trees. Without meaning to, Rodriguez followed. He parked on the shoulder and stepped into the woods, calling out, "Hey, wait!" The man didn't stop. He moved deeper until the forest swallowed them both. The light dimmed, the air colder here, the silence thicker. When Rodriguez finally caught up, the man was standing before a stone marker, half buried in leaves. It was covered in the same spiral symbol. He turned to face Rodriguez. "You shouldn't have opened it," the man said. Rodriguez's stomach dropped. "You saw it too?" The man shook his head slowly. "No, I remembered it." He stepped closer. His face was calm, too calm, eyes glassy like he was somewhere else. "Do you know what they really are, Doctor? Those beings? They aren't visitors. They're the first thoughts that ever existed. The universe's first attempt to speak. But speech became infection." Rodriguez took a step back. "You're one of them." The man smiled, but it wasn't human. It was a shape his mouth made without knowing how. "Not anymore. I tried to warn the others. Now I'm the echo they left behind." "What do you want from me?" "To finish what they began," he said. "The sound has chosen you. It's inside you now. The knocking, that's it trying to wake." Rodriguez felt the pounding in his chest grow stronger, vibrating his ribs. His vision blurred. "How do I stop it?" The man tilted his head. "You don't. You let it finish remembering. And when it does, everything else will forget." The trees shuddered. A wind tore through the clearing, carrying whispers, thousands of overlapping voices repeating his name. The man stepped back, his form flickering like a mirage. "It's already begun," he said. "Look." Rodriguez turned toward the road, but the road was gone. The town, the cars, the daylight, all fading into grey mist. Only the spirals remained, burned into every tree, glowing faintly. He fell to his knees. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. From somewhere deep in the fog, the being's voice returned, echoing through the forest. "Neither did I. But once you hear the truth, it never stops hearing you." The man dissolved into light, and the spirals dimmed one by one. The forest fell silent again, except for that steady knocking inside his chest, slow, patient, inevitable. Rodriguez closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, though he wasn't sure who he was praying to anymore. Rodriguez didn't remember walking out of the forest. One moment the fog was around him, breathing, watching. The next he was standing at the edge of an empty highway, the sun already low behind the trees. His truck sat on the shoulder, door wide open, keys still in the ignition. He climbed in, trembling, turned the key, and heard the engine growl awake. For a few miles the world seemed almost normal again. The faint static of the radio, the tires humming against the asphalt, the rhythm of breath. But the knocking hadn't stopped. It had changed. It wasn't in his chest anymore. It was in the air, echoing from nowhere, matching the pulse of the engine. He drove without knowing where, until he saw the sign, Cedar Hollow, 12 miles. It was the next town over, small and quiet. The kind of place where people still locked their doors with old iron keys. He needed people, light, noise, something human to drown the silence. The sun disappeared as he reached the first row of houses. Porch lights flickered on. He parked near a diner whose neon sign buzzed weakly against the night. Inside, a waitress wiped the counter and looked up at him with the practiced smile of someone who'd seen too many lonely men wander in. "You okay, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." He gave a shaky laugh. "Something like that." "Coffee?" she offered. "Please?" She poured him a cup, the steam curling between them like faint smoke. The warmth helped steady him. The diner was nearly empty, an old man in a corner booth reading a newspaper, a young couple whispering near the window. Normal life, ordinary sounds. For a brief moment he felt almost safe. Then the lights flickered. It was subtle at first, one bulb dimming, then another. The hum of the refrigerator deepened, slowing. The old man's newspaper crackled too loud when he turned the page. The waitress frowned, glancing at the ceiling. "Power's been acting up all week," she said. Rodriguez's hands tightened around the mug. The knocking returned, softer now, coming from behind the walls. 3 slow taps, a pause. 2 more. He stood abruptly. "Where's your breaker box?" She blinked. "Out back, by the dumpsters." "Why?" But he was already moving. He pushed through the back door into the cold night air. The alley behind the diner was narrow, lined with trash cans and dripping pipes. The breaker box was mounted on the wall, metal rusted, locked with a small padlock. He bent closer and froze. Carved into the metal was the spiral. He stumbled backward. The sound of knocking filled the alley. Now from everywhere, bouncing between the walls, he spun around. The air thickened. The light warped. The far end of the alley seemed to stretch away, growing longer with every blink. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't the luminous being, nor the man from the forest. It was someone else entirely. A woman in a pale coat, her face half hidden by her hair. She spoke without moving her lips. "You opened the first gate." The others awaking, Rodriguez's voice cracked.
Who are you?" "I am the part that remembers what you were before names." He shook his head. "No more riddles. Tell me what's happening." She stepped closer, her eyes like mirrors. "Every world dreams of its own end. Yours just heard itself speak." He backed against the wall. "I don't understand." "You will. When the last gate opens, all stories will collapse into the first one." The air vibrated. Somewhere inside the diner, glass shattered and someone screamed. The woman's body flickered, her shape breaking into threads of white light that snaked upward into the sky. The spiral on the breaker box began to glow, burning through the metal. Rodriguez ran. He burst through the diner's front door just as the power cut completely. Darkness swallowed everything. The waitress was gone. The couple near the window sat frozen, unmoving,
As if time had stopped around them. He fumbled for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and caught his reflection in the window. For a heartbeat, it wasn't his face staring back. It was the being's. Same hollow light, same eyes full of sorrow. He dropped the phone, and the screen went black. The knocking grew louder, faster, until it wasn't knocking at all, but a continuous pulse that filled the room. The ceiling trembled. The neon sign outside exploded in a shower of sparks. Through the window, the night sky rippled like water, revealing flashes of light beyond it. Cities floating upside down, oceans burning, faces pressed against the fabric of the sky, watching. Rodriguez fell to his knees, clutching his head. The voice of the being whispered through the chaos, calm and endless. "You asked what heaven and hell were. Now you remember. They are the same place, only the silence separates them." The world blurred. The walls of the diner peeled away like paper, revealing the forest again. The black tree stood where the counter had been, its roots spreading into infinity. Above it, a wound in the sky glowed, pulsing in rhythm with his heart, and for the first time he understood the knocking. It wasn't coming from within him, it was the gate calling his name, waiting to be opened completely. Rodriguez stood before the tree, breath shallow, the air vibrating around him like a living heartbeat. Every branch trembled with light. The wound in the sky widened, its edges dripping with fire and mist. He could feel it pulling at him, tugging at something deeper than flesh. He didn't know if he was still in the forest or if the forest had become something else entirely, a place between the living and the remembered. The knocking was gone now. In its place came a low hum that filled his skull, steady, relentless. He whispered into the air, "What do you want from me?" The answer came not as sound, but as thought, flowing straight into his mind. To finish what was begun. He turned toward the voice. The being had returned, but its shape was fractured, as if made of broken reflections of light and shadow. It flickered in and out, sometimes tall as the trees, sometimes human again. Rodriguez stepped closer, shouting over the roar of the wind. "You said the gate chose me. Why? Why me?" "Because you heal," it said simply. "That is what you were made for. But to heal a world infected with its own memory, you must first become the wound. He shook his head. I don't understand. The being raised its hand, and the world went silent. The trees stopped moving. Even his breath froze in his throat. Only the light moved, spinning around them in slow spirals. When your kind learned to name things, it said, you divided the source, you carved creation into parts until even the truth itself forgot its shape. The gates were meant to hold that division in place, but now they are remembering what they were. Rodriguez looked up at the wound in the sky. Within it, he could see faces, millions of them, turning toward him, whispering his name. So what happens if it opens? The being's form flickered, voice trembling. Then the first sound will be heard again, and all things will return to the silence that came before. His stomach twisted. That's death. No, it said softly, that is remembering. He stared at it, tears burning his eyes. You talk about silence like it's salvation, but silence means losing everything, everyone. Not losing, the being whispered. Becoming, the noise ends, the story resets, the pain ends. Rodriguez clenched his fists. Then why show me this? Why not just let it happen? The being moved closer, its fractured light brushing against his skin. It felt cold and warm all at once, like touching time itself. Because choice is the last illusion left. Every world must decide if it wishes to keep dreaming. He swallowed. You're saying I can stop it? You can choose what kind of silence remains, it said. One that remembers love, or one that forgets it. The light from the wound grew brighter, spilling across the forest. The trees caught fire without burning. The ground rippled like water. Rodriguez fell to his knees, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He thought of his patients, the lives he'd saved, the ones he hadn't. He thought of faith, of prayer, of every unanswered question that had haunted him since the night he'd found the creature in the rain. What happens to me if I do this? He asked quietly. The being's voice softened, almost kind. You cease to be you, but something of you will remain, woven into the silence, guiding those who come after. He closed his eyes. For a long moment there was only the sound of his heartbeat and the distant echo of the gate. Then he stood, hands trembling, and looked up at the wound. If the world has to end, he whispered, let it end, remembering love. The being bowed its head. Then speak, healer. He opened his mouth. A sound came out, a single note, pure and fragile, like the first breath of a newborn. It echoed through the forest, rising higher, resonating with the hum in the sky. The wound widened, light spilling across everything. He saw the cities again, the oceans, the people, all of them pausing, looking upward as the light reached them. And then one by one they began to dissolve into it, not in pain, but in peace, their forms turning to threads of silver drifting toward the stars. The being smiled faintly. It remembers. The forest folded in on itself. The light became everything. And then, silence. When Rodriguez opened his eyes, he was lying on a hospital bed. White light. Machines humming softly. A nurse stood beside him, adjusting an IV. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said gently, "you've been out for 2 days. You were found collapsed near the old trailhead. You're lucky to be alive." He stared at her, heart pounding. The world looked normal. Too normal. On the bedside table was a small metal charm, a spiral etched into its surface. He touched it, and for an instant he heard the faintest whisper. "It remembers love." He smiled weakly, tears sliding down his face. "Then it worked," he murmured. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying with it a sound that was not quite silence and not quite song.